Yeah, well, for GAA, now GAA Living, as you said, our rebrand, we've been doing work both in the UK and several markets across Europe for close to 10 years now. I would say that the UK is more progressed generally in the living sector of all the European countries. Obviously, I'm from the US, where it's very progressed, and saw the opportunity to come to the UK about 10 years ago. And so the UK is pretty far along on the journey of built to rent. Co-living now is becoming more and more common. Certainly PBSA was kind of the early, was one of the early sectors to take hold in the UK. And in the work that we're doing as a consultancy, I would say after the UK, Ireland is probably the next most progressed. And when I say Ireland, it's really a one market, it's Dublin. But there's quite a bit of PBSA, BTR, more activity. Quite a bit of a lull the last few years because of rent control, but now that's getting relaxed, and so we're hearing about investors looking at Dublin again to go back in. And then after that, there's certain countries in Europe that just have a different model historically. So Germany has a very active rental model, but it's a bit different. The Nordics, there's a lot of government subsidized housing, so there's a lot of rental housing. But if you kind of carve those out, Spain is the next hotspot for investors, and has been for a number of years. And the Spanish market was very overbuilt a decade ago, and a lot of the properties were lost to banks and to lenders. And then, as you would expect, the private equity guys came in and saw these opportunities to buy portfolios and buy platforms, buy companies, and they've done that. And so you see, pretty much all of the big private equity firms in Spain doing student housing for sure, a little bit of built to rent, but the sector that's really gotten the most traction in Spain is what they call flex living, which is we would probably call co-living, but it's basically under a hotel license, and it doesn't. In some cases, there are small kitchenettes. In some cases, they don't have kitchens. It's more communal kitchens, and it's meant to be housing for less than 12 months. But there are a lot of projects now that are being brought through that are really studio BTR under the guise of flex living. Yeah. So again, not as much BTR happening across Europe. So it's more of a focus on co-living, flex living, like I said, and student housing. And in PBSA, it's interesting because even if you look back to the UK, it was the PBSA that really kind of came first. And we're seeing that same thing happen in other European countries, where PBSA is kind of the tip of the spear. And then following behind that will be, it used to be, it would be BTR, but now it's more co-living or flex living. The product itself is fairly similar, I'd say. It's a typical setup with, amenities and on-site staff and all the rest. I'd say one of the amenities that's becoming not a nice to have, but a must have is co-working space. It used to be that the gym was the most important amenity. I don't think that's true anymore. I think the co-working space is now the most important amenity. And so there's always the question when we're working with clients, which amenities to put into a scheme, how big do they need to be, where do they get placed within the overall development to optimize the space. But it's interesting that there's always this push and pull between what you can get planning for and approvals for and what the market really wants. So one of the problems with, using Spain as an example since we're here in Barcelona, one of the challenges with planning in Spain is that you get what's called a license to do a development, and the license will tell you how many square feet you can build and how many units you can build, and so what the maximum is. And so developers, obviously trying to maximize the yield on that piece of land that they've acquired, will build the full square footage and the full number of units. But the math is such that this is for BTR. The math is such that the units end up being larger than they really need to be, or than the market really wants them to be, but it only makes sense to build once you've paid for the land and you're out there building it, to max out and build the maximum thing. So this is why historically BTR has been a bit of a challenge in Spain, is you get these schemes with lots of 3 bedrooms, sometimes you see 4-bedroom units, and we know, GAA through all of our research and real firsthand experience, that the most demand unit is a 1-bedroom, sometimes a studio, so smaller units, and as a result, the rent per square foot is that much higher, and as a result, the returns are that much better. And so this is one of the reasons why BTR has gotten less traction in Spain, And this is why this focus on this flex living product, which is basically taking the smaller unit sizes to an extreme, because now you've got flex living units that are 15 square meters or whatever they are. So that's a bit of the difference between the two markets. Yeah, I do, and just looking back to 30 years of experience in the U.S., the same thing happened there as well. Greystar didn't used to be Greystar, so I think it's just it's a function of scale and of getting a platform big enough to have it justify itself, and that's really not happened. If you take UK BTR as an example. Most of the investors and operating platforms are still subscale. And so you've got a lot of, when we talk about some of the bigger players that have 2 or 3 or maybe approaching 4,000 units, that's still subscale, really. So I think it's inevitable, but there'll be some combinations. I think just operationally it's going to need to happen. And it's just a function of the market maturing. So, it's happening, as you said, in PBSA. I think it will happen in BTR, slowly perhaps, but it will happen. And then in co-living as well. Yeah, I think there's two things going on. I think that the demand for PBSA continues to be very strong, and getting planning for BTR is a challenge. And certainly, and specifically, if you think about towers, between the Building Safety Act and the cladding issues we've had historically, and the cost of building a tower, I don't know that we're going to see a lot of new purpose-built BTR towers over the next decade. I think what we will see is lower density, low-rise, mid-rise. In the U.S., we call it garden-style apartments. And again, coming up in the U.S. multifamily industry, garden style was kind of the bread and butter of multifamily. So some people from UK or Europe think that, oh, U.S. it's all these shiny towers in New York City or whatever, and that there are now. But historically, it was a lot of suburban 2, 3, 4-story garden style, very simply built rental housing. That was really the main form of rental housing. We haven't really seen that in the UK yet, so I think there's definitely a market for that type of product. A little more suburban, a little less dense, but from a risk perspective and certainly a delivery and construction perspective, way easier to bring to market. Well, I've been thinking about that. Those that own rental towers in well-located or maybe even not so well-located, I think that, there will always be competition of some sort. What developers and capital are always clever to find a way to address a need, and there is a need. But I don't imagine that you'll be seeing other towers competing with that existing build-to-rent tower going up. Now, if they already have planning for it, if it's already in the system, maybe they have funding for it, sure. So you will see what's in the pipeline get built out, I would imagine. But beyond that, I don't think there'll be much. So it's an interesting thought for an investor to say, am I kind of protected in my position? If the building's well built, it's well managed, it's in a good location, and depending on the type of capital, it might be one to hold on to for a longer period of time.